There are some stories in the entertainment industry that never truly end, stories that continue to unfold with each passing year, revealing new layers of complexity, pain, and ultimately redemption. This is one of those stories. At 70 years old, Jermaine Jackson stands at a crossroads between the glory of his past and the quiet reality of his present, and what has happened to him will make you see fame, family, and sacrifice in an entirely different light. Before we dive deep into this emotional journey, I need to warn you, what you're about to discover about Jermaine's life might just bring tears to your eyes. But it's a story that needs to be told, because behind every spotlight, there's a shadow, and behind every smile, there's often a story of struggle that the world never sees. December 11th, 1954. Gary, Indiana. A city built on steel mills and broken dreams. In a tiny, cramped house on Jackson Street, a baby boy named Jermaine Jackson entered a world that would soon know his name, but would never truly understand the price he would pay for that recognition. Gary, Indiana wasn't just a place on a map. It was a proving ground, a place where poverty either crushed you or forged you into something stronger. For the Jackson family, it would do both. Joe and Catherine Jackson were raising what would eventually become a family of 11 children in conditions that most of us today couldn't imagine. There was no room for weakness, no space for individuality, and certainly no time for childhood in the traditional sense. From the moment Jermaine could hold an instrument, his fate was sealed. Jermaine wasn't born into privilege or comfort. He was born into a family where music wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. Joe Jackson, a stern, domineering figure who had failed in his own musical aspirations, saw his children as his second chance at glory. And make no mistake, Joe wasn't going to let that chance slip away. The rehearsals were relentless. While other children played outside, Jermaine and his brothers practiced until their fingers bled, until their voices cracked, until they got it perfect. And even then, it wasn't quite good enough for Joe. There are stories, painful stories, about the way Joe disciplined his children. He used fear as a motivator, a belt as a teaching tool, and humiliation as a form of quality control. Jermaine would later defend his father's methods, claiming that Joe's strict discipline instilled in them the work ethic that made them superstars. But you have to wonder, at what cost? How many childhoods were sacrificed at the altar of success? How many emotional scars were hidden behind those synchronized dance moves and perfect harmonies? By the time Jermaine was 10 years old, the Jackson Five was already taking shape. Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and little Michael. 5 brothers who would change the face of music forever. But here's what most people don't understand about those early years. Jermaine wasn't just another member of the group. He was the lead vocalist before Michael's voice matured. Jermaine was the heartthrob, the one with the smooth bass guitar skills and the silky voice that made teenage girls swoon. He was, in many ways, the original star of the Jackson Five. And that's what makes what happened next so tragically complicated. As Michael's talent became undeniable, as his voice soared to heights that even Joe Jackson couldn't have predicted, Jermaine found himself in an impossible position. He loved his little brother, truly loved him, but he also watched as the spotlight that had once been his gradually shifted to illuminate Michael alone. Imagine being exceptional at something, being told you're special, being the star, and then watching someone else, someone you're supposed to protect and support, eclipse you completely. That's not just professional rivalry. That's personal. That's family. And that's the kind of wound that never quite heals. The Jackson Five's rise to fame was meteoric. They signed with Motown Records in 1968, and by 1969, they were a sensation. I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save, I'll Be There. These weren't just hits, they were cultural phenomena. The Jackson Five became the first group in history to have their first 4 singles reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. They were appearing on television, touring the world, and living the dream that millions could only fantasize about. But dreams, as Jermaine would learn, often come with nightmares attached. In the midst of all this success, something happened that would both elevate Jermaine's status and complicate his life immeasurably. In 1973, at just 19 years old, Jermaine married Hazel Gordy, the daughter of Motown founder Berry Gordy. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a dynasty uniting with a dynasty. It was the Jackson star power merging with the Gordy empire. The wedding was lavish, a spectacle that seemed to confirm what everyone believed. Jermaine Jackson had truly arrived. He wasn't just a performer anymore. He was family to one of the most powerful men in the music industry. But this connection, this seemingly fortunate alliance, would eventually become a golden cage from which Jermaine would struggle to escape. Berry Gordy wasn't just Jermaine's father-in-law. He became a figure of authority almost as powerful as Joe Jackson himself. And when the Jackson 5 decided to leave Motown in 1975 to sign with CBS Records, seeking better royalty rates and more creative control, Jermaine faced the most difficult decision of his life. His brothers wanted to leave. They wanted freedom from Motown's restrictive contracts. But Jermaine was married to Hazel. He was family. He was loyal to Berry Gordy, the man who had given the Jackson 5 their first real break, the man who was now his daughter's father-in-law. So Jermaine made a choice that would haunt him for decades. He stayed with Motown. He didn't leave with his brothers. Try to understand the magnitude of this decision. This wasn't about business. This was about family loyalty being torn in two different directions. When the Jackson 5 became the Jacksons and continued their success on CBS Records, Jermaine was conspicuously absent. His youngest brother Randy took his place in the group. The brotherhood that had been forged in that tiny Gary, Indiana house, that had survived Joe Jackson's harsh discipline, that had conquered the music world, it was fractured. And Jermaine was on the outside looking in. But Jermaine didn't fade into obscurity. He launched a solo career with Motown that, by any normal standard, would be considered successful. His 1972 debut album featured the hit Daddy's Home, which climbed to number 9 on the Billboard charts. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Jermaine released a series of albums and singles that showcased his smooth, soulful voice. Let's Get Serious, in 1980, co-written by Stevie Wonder, became his biggest solo hit, reaching number 1 on the R&B charts and climbing into the top 10 on the pop charts. He had hits like Do What You Do, Dynamite, and Don't Take It Personal, which topped the R&B charts in 1989. By all objective measures, Jermaine Jackson was a successful solo artist. But success is relative, isn't it? Jermaine's solo achievements were respectable, even impressive. But they existed in the shadow of Michael Jackson's solo career, which wasn't just successful, it was stratospheric. When Michael released Thriller in 1982, it didn't just break records, it obliterated them. It became the best-selling album of all time. Michael wasn't just a star. He was a phenomenon, a once-in-a-generation talent that transcended music itself. And Jermaine? Jermaine was Michael Jackson's brother. That became his primary identity in the eyes of the world. Not Jermaine Jackson, the talented artist. Not Jermaine Jackson, the founding member of the Jackson 5. But Jermaine Jackson, Michael's older brother. The one who wasn't quite as talented. The one who stayed with Motown. The one who made the wrong choice. The comparisons were inevitable and cruel. Every album Jermaine released was measured against Michael's success. Every performance was analyzed through the lens of what Michael could do. And in his quieter moments, in the spaces between the applause, Jermaine had to grapple with a painful truth. He had been the star first, but he would forever be remembered second. Some sources suggest that there was jealousy, that Jermaine harbored resentment toward Michael. Others claim that Jermaine and Michael remained close, that whatever professional rivalry existed was overshadowed by brotherly love. The truth, as it so often is, was probably somewhere in between, a complex mixture of love, admiration, frustration, and regret. In 1984, there was a brief moment of reunion. The Jacksons, including Jermaine, came together for the Victory Tour. It was supposed to be a celebration, a chance for the brothers to perform together again, to show the world that the Jackson family bond was unbreakable. But even that reunion was complicated. Michael, by then the biggest star on the planet, participated reluctantly. There were tensions about the tour's production, about money, about creative direction. And Jermaine once again found himself in the middle. Not quite the star, not quite in the background, somewhere in that uncomfortable in-between space. But professional struggles were only one part of Jermaine's story. His personal life was becoming equally complicated, equally painful. His marriage to Hazel Gordy, which had started with such promise, began to crumble. For 15 years, Hazel endured rumors of Jermaine's infidelities. And these weren't just rumors. They were relationships with some of the most famous women in entertainment. There were whispers about affairs with Paula Abdul, with supermodel Iman, and most notably with Whitney Houston. The Whitney Houston affair deserves its own chapter in this story because it reveals so much about Jermaine's character, his desires, and his inability to commit fully to any one path. In the early 1980s, before Whitney became one of the greatest voices of all time, She and Jermaine worked together on music. He produced tracks for her debut album. They spent countless hours in the studio together, and according to multiple sources, including Jermaine's own sister LaToya Jackson, they fell into a passionate affair. Whitney was young, talented, on the verge of superstardom. Jermaine was married but unable to resist the connection he felt. The affair lasted about a year, and it ended, according to reports, because Jermaine wouldn't leave his wife. Whitney wanted more than secret rendezvous and late-night phone calls. She wanted commitment, and Jermaine couldn't give her that. Whitney's hit song, Saving All My Love for You, was rumored to be about this very situation, about loving someone who belongs to someone else, about being the woman on the side, about the pain of loving someone who won't choose you. But the Whitney Houston affair was just one of many indiscretions. Jermaine also had a relationship with Margaret Maldonado, a film producer, while still married to Hazel. And this wasn't just an affair. This relationship produced children. Jermaine fathered 2 children outside of his marriage to Hazel, Jeremy Maldonado Jackson and Jordan Michael Jackson, both with Margaret Maldonado. When Hazel learned about these children, when she realized that her husband's infidelity wasn't just emotional but had resulted in other families, she finally filed for divorce in 1987. The divorce was finalized in 1988, ending a 15-year marriage that had been the foundation of Jermaine's adult life. The end of his marriage to Hazel should have been a wake-up call, a moment for Jermaine to reflect and change his ways. Instead, what happened next would become one of the most controversial and painful episodes in the Jackson family saga. In 1986, Jermaine's younger brother Randy began dating a young woman named Alejandra Genevieve Oaziaza. She was just 16 or 17 years old when they met, though some accounts suggest she lied about her age, telling Randy she was 18. Randy moved her into the family home at Havenhurst, and they began a relationship that produced 2 children, Savannah Jackson and Stephen Randall Jackson Jr. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that's almost difficult to believe. After Randy and Alejandra broke up, after their relationship ended, Jermaine began secretly seeing Alejandra himself, his own brother's ex-girlfriend, the mother of his brother's children. And not just seeing her, Jermaine married Alejandra in 1995, less than a year after his divorce from his second wife, Eliza Schaff. This marriage produced 2 more children, Jaffer Jeremiah Jackson, born in 1996, and Jermajesty Jermaine Jackson, born in 2000. Yes, Jermajesty, a name that combines Jermaine and Majesty in a display of ego that many found difficult to understand. The implications of this marriage were profound and painful for the entire Jackson family. Randy felt betrayed by his own brother. The children born from Randy's relationship with Alejandra and the children born from Jermaine's marriage to Alejandra are both half-siblings and cousins. A family tree so complicated it's almost tragic. This wasn't just an error in judgment. This was a fundamental violation of the bonds that are supposed to hold families together. And the fallout from this decision would reverberate through the Jackson family for years. Jermaine's marriage to Alejandra lasted from 1995 to 2004, though it was marked by constant conflict, particularly over money and custody of their children. When they divorced, Jermaine was ordered to pay child support he would later claim he couldn't afford. Court documents revealed that Jermaine's monthly income had plummeted to just under $1,100. He requested that his child support payments be reduced from $3,000 per month to just $215 per month. This wasn't just a financial crisis. It was a complete collapse of the wealth and status he had once enjoyed. How does someone go from being a member of one of the most famous musical groups in history, from having hit solo records and touring the world, to claiming poverty? The answer is complicated. The Jackson family, for all their talent and success, was notoriously bad with money. Poor business decisions, bad investments, extravagant spending habits, and yes, supporting multiple families and dealing with expensive divorces all contributed to Jermaine's financial downfall. In 1997, the Jackson family filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection after their company, Jackson Communications Incorporated, collapsed under more than $45 million in debt. While Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson had accumulated significant wealth from their solo careers, the other siblings, including Jermaine, struggled financially. Reports suggest that Jermaine has been dependent on his mother, Katherine Jackson, for financial support. Katherine reportedly gives him a monthly stipend of around $12,000 from the allowance she receives from Michael Jackson's estate. Think about that for a moment. a man who once stood on stage in front of thousands of adoring fans, who had hit records and fame, now dependent on his mother's charity, living off his deceased brother's legacy. It's not just tragic, it's a cautionary tale about the fleeting nature of fame and the importance of financial wisdom. But Jermaine's story isn't just about money problems and relationship scandals. There's also a spiritual dimension that adds another layer of complexity to his life. In 1989, during a trip to Bahrain in the Middle East, Jermaine converted to Islam. He took the name Muhammad Abdul Aziz, though he continues to use his birth name professionally. Jermaine has spoken about how Islam brought him peace, how it gave him a moral and spiritual framework that had been missing from his life. He embraced the religion with genuine devotion, performing the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca and adopting Islamic practices in his daily life. His conversion was significant and sincere, but it also created new tensions within the Jackson family, who had been raised as Jehovah's Witnesses. Catherine Jackson, deeply devoted to her faith, was reportedly heartbroken by Jermaine's conversion. And in the years that followed, Jermaine's actions, multiple marriages, affairs, the scandal with Alejandra, seemed to contradict the moral principles of the faith he had adopted. It raised questions about whether Jermaine truly understood what he was committing to, or whether his conversion was another chapter in a lifelong search for identity and purpose, a search that had never quite reached its destination. And then there's the Michael factor, which is impossible to ignore when discussing Jermaine's life. The relationship between Jermaine and Michael was complex, layered with love, admiration, competition, and possibly resentment. When Michael died on June 25, 2009, at the age of 50 from cardiac arrest induced by a fatal combination of medications, Jermaine was devastated. He was one of the family members who rushed to the hospital. He was one of the first to speak publicly about Michael's death, his voice breaking with emotion as he addressed the media. In those moments, whatever rivalry or jealousy might have existed between them seemed to evaporate, replaced by raw grief and loss. In the years following Michael's death, Jermaine became something of a guardian of Michael's legacy. Or at least, that's how he positioned himself. In 2011, he published a memoir titled, "You Are Not Alone, Michael Through a Brother's Eyes," in which he attempted to provide an intimate portrait of Michael as a brother, not just as a superstar. The book was Jermaine's attempt to reclaim some of the narrative, to assert his place in Michael's story, and by extension, in music history. But the book was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a loving tribute to a brother gone too soon. Others saw it as Jermaine's attempt to profit from Michael's death, and to rehabilitate his own image by association. The memoir also revealed some uncomfortable truths about the Jackson family dynamics. Jermaine acknowledged the harsh discipline from their father Joe, but defended it as necessary. He spoke about the pressure they all felt, the competition, the way fame twisted their relationships. But he also spoke about love, about the bond between brothers who had gone through something that no one else could truly understand. Reading between the lines, you could sense Jermaine's struggle to reconcile his feelings. The love he had for Michael with the envy he must have felt, the pride in his brother's achievements with the pain of his own comparative failures. There were also controversies surrounding Jermaine's involvement in the aftermath of Michael's death. There were disputes about Michael's will, about the management of his estate, about who had the right to speak for Michael. Some family members, including Jermaine, felt that the executors of Michael's estate, who were not family members, should not have so much control over Michael's legacy and assets. These legal battles were messy, public, and often seemed to be more about money than about honoring Michael's memory. Jermaine was caught in the middle of it all, sometimes supporting his mother Catherine's claims against the estate, sometimes seeming to pursue his own interests. It wasn't pretty, and it didn't reflect well on the family. As Jermaine entered his 60s and now his 70s, the trajectory of his life became clearer. He continued to perform occasionally, appearing at nostalgia concerts and special events that celebrated the music of the Jackson 5 and the Jacksons. He tried to launch various projects, including reality television appearances, but none of them gained significant traction. In recent years, reports suggest that Jermaine has been living abroad, primarily in the Middle East, particularly in Dubai and Bahrain. He married for the fourth time to Mayday Gonzalez, a woman significantly younger than him, and they have been living a relatively quiet life away from the American spotlight. In 2024, as Jermaine Jackson turned 70 years old, the world looked at his life with a mixture of nostalgia and sadness. He's a man who was once at the center of the music universe, whose voice was heard by millions, whose talent was undeniable. But he's also a man whose decisions, both personal and professional, led him down a path marked by broken relationships, financial struggles, and unfulfilled potential. Turning 70 should be a time of reflection and celebration, of looking back on a life well lived and accomplishments to be proud of. For Jermaine, it's more complicated than that. What does he see when he looks back? Does he see the glory days of the Jackson 5? Does he see the solo hits and the packed arenas? Or does he see the opportunities missed, the choices made that can never be unmade? The saddest part of Jermaine's story isn't that he failed, because by most measures, he didn't. He had a successful music career. He experienced fame and fortune that most people can only dream about. The tragedy is that he had so much more to offer, so much more potential that was never fully realized. He could have been a superstar in his own right if he hadn't been constantly compared to Michael. He could have been a respected elder statesman of the music industry if he hadn't been derailed by personal scandals. He could have been financially secure if he had made better business decisions. All those could-haves add up to a portrait of a man who was, in many ways, his own worst enemy. And yet, to dismiss Jermaine Jackson as merely a cautionary tale would be unfair and incomplete. There are moments in his life that deserve recognition and respect. He was part of a cultural revolution. The Jackson 5 weren't just another boy band. They were Black excellence personified at a time when the civil rights movement was still fighting for basic equality. They showed that Black artists could dominate the mainstream, could appeal to audiences of all races, could be not just successful but iconic. Jermaine was part of that. His bass playing, his vocals, his stage presence, they all contributed to the Jackson 5's success. Without Jermaine, there is no Jackson 5 as we know it. His solo career, while overshadowed by Michael's, produced some genuinely good music. Songs like Let's Get Serious and Do What You Do are R&B classics that still sound fresh decades later. He collaborated with some of the greatest artists of his generation, including Stevie Wonder and Whitney Houston. He was respected by his peers as a talented musician and vocalist. That counts for something. That matters. And on a personal level, despite all the drama and controversy, Jermaine is a father to 7 children, possibly more, depending on which reports you believe. Whatever his shortcomings as a husband and brother, his children speak about him with a mixture of love and complexity that suggests he wasn't a completely absent or uncaring father. His son Jaffer Jackson is currently portraying his uncle Michael in the upcoming Michael Jackson biopic, carrying on the family legacy in a new generation. These connections, these relationships, are part of Jermaine's legacy too. So what happened to Jermaine Jackson at 70? The answer is both simple and profoundly complex. What happened is that life happened. Fame happened. Pressure happened. Bad decisions happened. Broken relationships happened. Financial collapse happened. But survival also happened. Resilience happened. A continued connection to music happened. A search for meaning and spirituality happened. Jermaine Jackson at 70 is a man who lived through extraordinary circumstances, who made mistakes that most of us will never face, who experienced highs and lows that most people can't even imagine. He's a man who was both blessed and cursed by being born into one of the most famous families in entertainment history. The Jackson family story is often told through the lens of Michael and Janet, the 2 members who achieved the greatest individual success. But the stories of the other siblings, particularly Jermaine, are equally important because they reveal the cost of fame, the burden of being in the shadow of greatness, and the human tendency to make flawed choices when faced with impossible situations. Jermaine's life is a reminder that talent alone isn't enough. That fame and success don't guarantee happiness or financial security. That family relationships are complicated and can be both a source of strength and tremendous pain. That the choices we make in our 20s and 30s can echo through our entire lives. That redemption and peace are possible, but not guaranteed. When you look at photographs of Jermaine Jackson today, you see a man who looks older than his 70 years in some ways, weathered by a life that was never quite what it seemed from the outside. But you also see glimpses of that young man from Gary, Indiana, who dreamed of something bigger, who had a voice that could move people, who was part of something magical. Both of those people exist in Jermaine Jackson. The dreamer and the cautionary tale, the talented artist and the troubled individual, the beloved brother and the source of family pain. As Jermaine Jackson moves through his 70s, living quietly in the Middle East, far from the spotlight that once defined him, You have to wonder what he thinks about late at night when the world is quiet and there's no one to perform for. Does he have regrets? Absolutely. Would he do things differently if he could go back? Almost certainly. But he can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is move forward with the consequences of our choices, trying to find peace and meaning in whatever time we have left. For Jermaine Jackson, that search continues. The music that made him famous may have faded from the radio. His name may no longer be in the headlines, but his story, complicated, painful, and ultimately human, continues to unfold. The tragedy of Jermaine Jackson isn't that he failed to achieve success. It's that the success he did achieve was never quite enough to fill the void left by all the things he lost along the way. The brotherhood fractured by professional decisions, the marriages destroyed by infidelity, the financial security squandered by poor choices, the potential never fully realized, the shadow of Michael that could never quite be escaped. At 70 years old, Jermaine Jackson stands as a testament to both the glory and the pain that comes with being part of one of the most famous families in the world. His life is a story of what happens when extraordinary talent meets human weakness, when dreams collide with reality, when the spotlight reveals everything you never wanted the world to see. And that's why, when you really understand the full scope of Jermaine Jackson's journey, it's almost impossible not to feel something deep in your heart, whether it's sadness, empathy, disappointment, or a complex mixture of all three. Because at the end of the day, beyond the fame and the scandals and the comparisons to Michael, Jermaine Jackson is simply a man who tried to navigate an impossible life and, like so many of us, didn't always get it right. And maybe that's the most human thing about him.